Good evening, everybody. With the blessings of the founder of ELTAI, Padma Shri S. Natarajan, I welcome the resource person, Mr. Pete Sharma, and all the participants to the 28th ELTAI webinar series on virtual blended learning, making it real. This webinar is mainly for all teachers who are interested in the interface of technology and ELT pedagogy. To make sure that everything goes fine with this webinar, we have a few instructions for the participants. The session is being recorded. I would request all the participants to kindly avoid sharing your personal details like email ID and phone number in the chat. Now I request Dr. Xavier to play the video on ELTAI. Thank you, Xavier, for that wonderful video on ELTAI. Now we will get to know about our speaker of the day briefly. Mr. Pete Sharma is a Director of Training at Pete Sharma Associates Limited, a consultancy and training organization at United Kingdom. He works as a lecturer in English for academic purposes at Warwick University, UK. Pete has co-written many books on educational technology in ELT. We will be listening to a person who loves the interface of technology and pedagogy, a wearer of many hats in the professional arena. Over to you, Pete.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody for coming along today. So, good morning from the UK, and I'll say welcome to this session, which is called Virtual Blended Learning, Making It Real. I'm speaking to you from Rochester in the UK, and I'd very much like, if you haven't typed into the chat where you are, to feel free to type in where you are now into the chat. The chat is saved after this, so we'll be able to go back and have a look at where all the participants are from. Thank you to Anitha for, sorry about my pronunciation, for introducing me. And I'm really here speaking to you as a teacher trainer. I have indeed been involved in writing many books about this particular area, technology and English language teaching, and that's my most recent book on the right, Best Practices for Blended Learning, which was reviewed in the Foretell magazine. And if you want to know a little bit more about me, my interview is in Dialogues, English Studies in India. It's been a long time since I met Anita. It was 2012 at this wonderful conference, High Tech, Low Tech, No Tech, Learning Technologies in Practice. That's when I was last in India for professional reasons. So let me tell you that the aim of this session is to explore how the principles of virtual blending can help teachers in their move to working online. There'll be 3 parts. The first one, I'll just give you the background to where we are now, and the central part is I'll be describing 3 scenarios for virtual blending, and then I'll finish off with some practical ideas. We'll finish with about 10 minutes maybe for just a few questions at the end of the webinar. Do make sure that you remember that website. It's very easy to remember, www.petesharma.com. And at the end of the webinar, I'll post this PowerPoint as a PDF if you would like to download it so you can see the slides. And also I'll post a handout with references and websites. So you can just relax now and enjoy the webinar. So let's kick off with part 1, and this is the background. And in the background, I'm just going to speak very briefly about blended learning itself, and then we'll look at this transition that many teachers are making between teaching in the bricks and mortar classroom to teaching online. Blended learning is well known for having multiple definitions. If you're interested in exploring those definitions, have a look at the handout. There's a link to key concepts in ELTAI, which lists about 4 major definitions. There are many. I once counted 32 different definitions of blended learning. Many of them are similar, but really what we're looking at when I say blended learning is this area of hybrid teaching. It lives somewhere between 30% on the left and all the way across the middle to around 80%. This course would mean that between 30 and 80% are delivered inside a classroom. If you go all the way across to the right, you have 100% online. That's often called distance learning, and this is not what we mean by blended learning. If you go all the way to the left, you have 100% in a classroom, and that's not what we mean by blended learning. So really, I'm going to be referring to the classical definition of blended learning, which is face-to-face, classroom delivery, plus some of the course being delivered across an online platform. So it's time for our first poll, just to see the audience here at ELTAI. If you consider that you run blended learning courses. Now, I've also put into this poll the question, did you run blended learning courses before the pandemic? Because of course, many things have changed in 2020. So the poll will appear now, and you can choose to tell us all if the answer is yes, you do, no, you don't. F means that maybe you've thought about blended learning and in the future you will run blended learning, and a question mark is if you're not quite sure if you do or you don't, because of course there are multiple definitions. So I'm going to call on Javier now to kindly launch the first poll, and let's see what the audience of 606 people vote. So the votes are coming in live, which is always very exciting. And it's really thrilling to see that 44%, so it's a very high percent, a maximum percent do run blended learning courses. Many people don't. Some of you are thinking about the future, because of course there will be what's called a new normal, although it's worth thinking that the new normal for India will be different to Thailand, it will be different for the UK. There's no one thing which is the new normal. We do different things. Great. So thank you very much. It looks as though I'm giving a webinar to a wide variety of attendees, and we're going to go back now to the presentation, and thank you very much for finishing the poll. We're going to have a look at the final result later. So just to focus on blended learning, I think it's a very flexible concept. So you can't say it's A plus B. You can't only say it's two things. It's many different things, and it changes. That's really interesting. It's a very dynamic context. It's always changing. However, one thing that we can say is if you're going to run blended learning courses, there are 4 things which can really help you to ensure that your course is successful. And I'm going to run through those 4 things now. Have a look at this diagram. It's a very famous diagram looking at the variables of time and place. And you can see on the top left hand side there, the classroom, which is where I started teaching. All my teaching when I started in 1980 was done in the same time, same place. I only ever taught in the classroom. That was all. And then if you start to look at the other squares, there are different time, different place, such as when you send an email or when you're working on forums. And what's happening now, it's the same time, technically, even though you're on Indian Standard Time, I'm on British Standard Time, but we're in different places. So appropriacy is making sure that whatever you do fits nicely into the area. So for example, if you want to have a discussion with your group, the great place to do it is in the classroom. That's where we like to discuss things. Okay, you can do it online, but discussion, fluency development is normally done in the classroom. But if you ask a question, it's actually quite difficult to answer in any kind of deeper or more meaningful way. It might be much better to post your question onto a forum and let people draft their answers. So critical thinking, maybe that's more appropriately approached in in a forum, so asynchronously. So basically, appropriacy is a key factor. Make sure that whatever you're doing is appropriate for the mode in which you're doing it. The second factor is integration. And one of the biggest criticisms of blended learning is, oh, everything I did in my self-study, it had no relation to what the teacher was doing in the classroom. So the classwork absolutely complements what is done in the self-study time, and what the student does in self-study is brought back into the classroom. Integration is a critical factor. How you feel about it all is really, really important. Ask many teachers, do you think you could do this online? Before the pandemic, they have a clear answer, and it's no. Now, maybe their attitude has changed. I do yoga, and before the pandemic, if you asked me if I could work with my yoga teacher online, I would absolutely say no. It's hands-on. You have to be with your teacher in the same time and same place. Now, I benefit greatly from online yoga. So your attitude to blended online to teaching is more important than your knowledge or your skills. Knowledge is very easily acquired. You can go to a book and find out. Skills is harder, but it's your hidden beliefs and values in teaching that are more important. So what do you believe about blended learning? If you are positive, then your students will also feel that positivity. And finally, training is a critical factor. It's often forgotten that you need to train the students in the software, and you need to train the teachers. You don't just throw them in and say blended is best. So a very rich concept which we've been looking at very, very briefly. I'm going to move on now in background to this incredible transition which has happened for many, many thousands of teachers across the world, where one day they're in a classroom and the next day they're delivering the same course in an online environment. So that's all been created because of a coronavirus that's made this transition very swift. So what people sometimes forget, of course, is that online teaching has been around for many, many years. It has a whole basis in theory and research. And for many, many years, people like myself have also been exploring this leveraging of what is the best that you can get from the teacher in the classroom, and what is the best that online offers you, which is, of course, that you can go at your own speed. You can work anywhere on a laptop or a smartphone. You can work at any time, 24/7. Sometimes, for me, it's described anyway as the best of both worlds. And for many, many people, it can easily be the worst of both worlds, that the students who would prefer to be in a classroom don't contribute to the knowledge building which is happening in the online environment, and people who love working online, they don't like going to the classroom at 9 o'clock in the morning. That is absolutely, the timetable works against them. So it's extremely interesting, these different views. So I suggest that if you're involved now in online teaching, that you just sit down and you make lists like this. Think about what is it that you do in the classroom. One thing I do very funnily is when I walk in is I often find that I move the tables and chairs around in the room so that they can match my activities better? And what is it that you actually do as an online teacher, such as using this kind of headset that I'm using here, knowing about my webcam and so on? And then in the middle, you can write down all the things that you do in a classroom and also that you do online, such as you motivate students, you give instructions, task instructions, you give your lesson aims, you have a warmer, and so on. So many things are very similar. Many things are very different. So, of course, in the classroom, you put your students into pairs and small groups. You can do similar things online using Zoom's breakout rooms, for example, but it's different. Look at my small picture there. You can see me very, very small, but obviously the communication which happens through gesture and facial expressions, that can be very, very different. So often online, you're nominating people clearly with their names. So there are things that are done which are the same as in the classroom, but they're done in a different way. So we can break down online teaching really into these two elements of synchronous teaching. You may do this with a platform like Zoom. You may use WebEx meetings. Skype is a very popular platform. This summer, a lot of people started to use Microsoft MS Teams, and there are literally thousands of ways that you can teach online. But also it's worth thinking that you will deliver your course asynchronously as well. And there are thousands of platforms, literally thousands. Every day there are new platforms that come out. Moodle is very, very common. It's when I did a research for the British Council, it came out as the most popular platform, but many people absolutely hate it and use a completely different platform. So it's very, very interesting, the different kinds of platform. Okay, so that really brings me to the end of the background, and really I've just been describing blended learning and then also saying that there is a big transition between classroom now onto online. So let's move to the central part of this webinar, which is focusing on virtual blending. That's an interesting idea. What I'm going to do is just describe 3 different scenarios. The first one is a teacher that's using publisher-produced digital materials. Then I'll tell you a little bit about our summer when we took an English for Academic Purposes course. We flipped the course so that the students did all the work online before they came to the live online classes. And then finally, if you actually do your own materials creating, and so I've called that DIY. These scenarios are very, very different scenarios because context is critical when we talk about using technologies. Everybody's context is different. So I'm going to invite you now to type into the chat, and what I'd like you to do is, if you may be teaching all these scenarios, if you teach primarily with Courseware, language teaching courseware, I'm going to give the example of OUP, Oxford University Press. But there are many publishers and many publisher platforms. If you use a publisher platform, could you just type in the name, for instance, CUP course or Longman or whatever? I work for Warwick University and I need to use the platform of my university. That's it. I don't have a choice. We use Moodle. And so if you use a platform which your institution suggests that you use for teaching, could you type the name of that platform into the chat? And if you sit at home and you perhaps you're a freelance person and you just go to the internet and you use a platform or a piece of software to create materials, then type the name into the class chat, such as ClassMill is a free platform to use. Okay, so let's just pause for a minute and let's have a look at what people are typing in the chat. It'll come very quickly. Wow. OUP, I see AMRA users. This will come so quickly that it's very, very useful to go back and have a look at this after the webinar's over. That's certainly something that I'll be doing. I'm sure Anita will be doing it because it's giving us lots and lots of data about what you use. So before I move on, I would just like to say everybody's context is slightly different. I would like to say that you can spend hours and hours arguing and discussing about MS Teams, for example. MS Teams is awful. It's the worst platform I've ever used, one teacher will say. Someone else will say, it's fine. I really love MS Teams. So you can expect people to completely disagree, and that's okay. It's just worth looking at what reasons you're using the platform for. So thank you for all your work typing into the chat. And let's move on now and start to look at the end. And this happens to be OUP courseware. I happen to write some blogs for OUP, and so I took a look at this. And it's first important to say that you have this platform, but you could use that in completely different ways. That's a really important point, that you could have one set of software, but you could use it in a lockstep way, you could use it in a targeted way, or you could use it in an open access way. Let's have a look at that. So if you look at this slide, you can see on the down at the bottom there is a lock, like a lock and key. So you could lock all of the course except Unit 1. So using the material in a lockstep way would be the teacher clearly decides the route and the time that the material is released to the students. You could also kick off your course and say, here you go, guys, go up and use your material. This is often known as an open access way, because you can see all the units there and the students can go up and go immediately to Unit 6 now, or they could go to Unit 11, or they could come back to Unit 3. You could also use it in a targeted way, which is extremely useful. Look at the names of my students there. You can see all my students were from China. You can see Belai Chen, Chon Li, Young Yi Du, and you could actually say to Belai, okay, Belai, I want you to work on the blue sections and the green sections only. So you are actually targeting for your students specific pieces of work to do away from the classroom. So completely different ways of using the same material. So virtual blended learning can leverage many positives. I think one of them is this flexibility in how you use the material. The other is differentiation, which is a key term, I think, in English language teaching now, that people are doing different courses, and it is one course, but inside that course, they are following different paths, and that material can be personalized. Choice is really interesting. You have the same activity, but you could do that in different ways. I'll give you some examples of that. So here's the typical material that you have on a learner platform, and it would be very useful if your student isn't there, they miss something. So you can actually say, okay, don't worry if you miss the face-to-face class, you can continue through the materials yourself. Students that need extra help can choose to access reference material when they want. This is information on demand. If you're competitive, you can do the same material again and again and again and improve your score, push it up from 10, push it up to 12. So it's absolutely fascinating that the courseware designers create the material in one way. Here, read the grammar reference, complete the sentence, then listen and check. Then listen and check. But what if the student wants to listen first? They can. That's the point. They can choose, they can listen first and then fill it in. So all the students are working on the same material, but in different ways depending on their individual learner style. The power of data is quite amazing on these platforms. You have lots and lots of information generated by the platform. You can see when the students started, how long they spent on an exercise, which is all extremely interesting. I never had access to this kind of data before, and the washback on my classes was quite extraordinary, that you can see for when people start and when they finish. So I've been talking about using courseware, which has been written by ELT authors. It's been created by a huge publishing house to unbelievable levels of quality. But this wasn't the course we gave in summer. This is our second virtual blend. It's flipping an EAP course. So the course exists already. It's a very finite course. You know what you're doing on an EAP course, which is how to deal with plagiarism, bibliographies, referencing, etc., etc. And we had 2 modes of delivery. So this is what we decided to do. It took us months to create it, about 3 months. We all worked very, very hard. We put asynchronous material on the Moodle, and then we taught in the classroom, online classroom in MS Teams. And this is really a good example of a virtual blend. It's all done online, but it still has those 2 halves. So students in China would wake up in the morning, they'd go to the welcome screen, they'd see their course, and the welcome screen would say, introduce yourself, write a message and post it to the platform. So students would write and read everybody else's message on the platform. Then they would sit, and the next thing they would have to do is to prepare for the class. So what they're typing on the platform is going to be used in the online lesson, which is absolutely critical. This is the integration that I spoke about earlier. There you can see some of the materials, writing, how to introduce yourself. All of these were written before the course and delivered on the Moodle. There's me. This is the kind of lesson that the students would have sitting at home, and it's very interesting sitting at home in the coronavirus. What's happening in where you're working? It's so different, obviously, to being in a classroom. Maybe your mother is behind you cooking a meal, and you are there as a student taking this course with your headphones on. It's an extraordinary situation. We created these materials. We used a program which is called H5P. This is a very small glimpse of the variety and the range of exercises that you can create using this particular program. All the typical things are there: dragging and dropping, writing essays, and so on. But what's critical is that all of this material, which was created for the Moodle, you could do as a self-study package, but the critical thing is it's linked with the teacher and the synchronous classes that are delivered. So that's the second scenario. It was building our own course, and we had to use Moodle because the university told us to and supported us. And then finally, if you just sit and you work as a freelance teacher, you might choose, like I did, to use Google Classroom. Everything is there. This is a lesson that I wrote for my friend who I was teaching. And I said, what do you want to learn about? And he said, I want to learn about David Bowie, the English musician. I want to speak about Woody Allen films. I had to create that. I couldn't go and find a nice English language teaching course on Woody Allen. I wrote it, and we used this free platform to deliver the lessons, to deliver the class. Okay, so really I've been speaking a little bit about virtual blending, which is using synchronous online teaching together with asynchronous learning, usually done from a platform. And we're going to finish off now this central part of the webinar by moving on to some practical ideas, which I've chosen because they illustrate some of these key principles. So I've divided these as follows: ideas connected with grammar, speaking, vocabulary, listening, and reading. Because of time, there isn't anything there connected with writing, but obviously writing can be developed with an online platform. Also phonology, all of these things you can work on in the classroom and also online. So let's start with grammar. And one of the most interesting things I discovered using the OUP material is what happens when the student doesn't understand the feedback that the program gives. It's a really critical issue. You create an exercise for the student to do. The student does the exercise and they get machine feedback. It's not artificial intelligence feedback. It's just typical feedback of the yes, no variety. So here we go. The student has put in, he'll be in Mario's restaurant. He goes there often recently. And the program gives feedback. And what I found is that the student wanted to talk to me as the teacher. The self-study material didn't give the answer that they needed, and so they began to use the messages part of the forum. And this was absolutely fantastic. The student going into messages, sending messages to me saying, hey, what's the difference between simple past and present perfect? And suddenly you're in a dialogue online with your student, which can come into the classroom. That was absolutely fantastic, because if you're working online alone and you don't understand the feedback, you might give up. The fallout rate for teaching online, purely online, is massively high. I discovered that the student wanted to take screenshots and type in these questions. I don't understand what the answer means. When that was posted to the OUP platform, other students could see those questions and they would be able to help. And by the time we came to the grammar lesson, the students were dying to know the answer. And that's fantastic, because I often find that students are less than motivated when it comes to the grammar lesson. Okay, so those are just a couple of things connected with grammar. Let's now look at the area of discussion. We have had a poll in this webinar. You can run polls, of course, using well-known software like Kahoot, and here we have Mentimeter, and this idea that before the face-to-face online lesson, you actually warm up your students through the notice board or through the discussion thread, really helps to integrate their self-study work and their classroom work. So for instance, you notice in the book that the next unit is about TripAdvisor. So before the class, you just send a message to all the students. Do you write reviews on TripAdvisor? Do you follow what they say. So students are already warming up to the task before they come to the lesson. So I think the discussion forum is a fantastic place online to really ask current questions which marry in with the course book. Every course book is out of date the second it's printed. Imagine you had a course book telling you about the President of the United States. Well, I'll tell you, that course book would probably be out of date now. Personalization. Can you imagine how I felt as a teacher when I noticed that the next unit in the book was all about the film Lion? And I said, I can't believe it, because I was adopted in India. This is my own true story, my personal story. That's me as a baby, by the way. That's my mum, who's from Newcastle, my dad. They adopted me in Poon, and they brought me here to the UK, and I grew up in the UK. So I was adopted. Look at Saru's story. If you have ever seen this film, my partner can't watch this film because she's always in tears. It's amazing. You could type in the platform before the lesson, have you seen the film? And then as the answers come, you could change the seating or how you get people to work in breakout rooms online, depending on their answers. So someone who has seen the film, someone who hasn't, can work together. So this is the teacher's job, to personalize the digital or the print materials. So there are plenty of opportunities for personalizing lessons. Let's move on to vocabulary now, and you have a second poll. In this part, I'm just going to explain a very interesting diagram here, which is, if you know a word, yes or no, and quite often you can't say, yes, I know it, no, I don't know it. Let's take a few new words in English, like furlough. I say new, furlough's been in the language for quite a long time, but maybe number one represents you've never seen or heard the word before. That's number one. Number two, maybe you've seen the word, but you don't really know what it means. Let's move on up now to number three. Number three is that you think you know what it means. You've seen the word maybe, you think it means this, but you're not absolutely sure. Number four would be that you know the word and you could give a synonym or a translation of the word. And number five, you can actually generate sentences with that word in them. So you can use the word in a sentence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you lots of words in English now. Just have a look at them and just decide, okay, if you had to give a number for those words, would they be 1, 2, or 3? And then I'll choose a word, and I'd actually like you to type your number into the chat. So if that's clear, let's go on to have a look at some of the words I chose. I'll give you a moment to have a look at those words. Choose your numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Okay, well, we clearly don't have enough time to do all of these, but we're going to do the very, very first one. So I'm going to read out the word. Xavier is going to start the poll, and I'd like you in the poll to type in your number for the word, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. The word is, I'm hesitating here, ethogenic. Ethogenic. And I'm so delighted to see that the scoring comes in with 1, 16%, 2, 22%, 3, a third of people in this webinar think they know what it is, 4, which is 10%, and 5, 11%. So imagine thank you very much for voting. Imagine I was doing this in the classroom, then I would ask a 5, could you please help the other students and say what the explanation of that word is? And if you don't know, you can learn from that student. Okay, we have just a few seconds, and so I'm just going to go and actually say to somebody who is a 5, if you know what it means, would you type in the definition into our chat box? Okay, so this is a bit scary here, but if anybody in this webinar is part of the 10% of people who know the word ethogenic or ethogenic, then please feel free to type in your definition. So you could say, I love this activity because I think this is often how we learn vocabulary, that you notice that not every word progresses through each phase on the continuum, but usually you do build up your knowledge of vocabulary over time. Okay, maybe there'll be, thank you, the study of behavior. Thank you to Usha Kamath. Because I'll tell you, I'm doing something very brave. I went to my master's material and I found this word, and I myself don't really know exactly what it is. So thank you very much for that definition. Okay, so let's just move on now to 2 language skills. How might you deal with the skill of listening and the skill of reading in the asynchronous or synchronous classroom? I would say listening has been one of the skills which has come out of the language classroom now and is often dealt with alone. In other words, students away from the classroom can improve their listening. So here's an example. Some people may be familiar with this website, TED, and once you're away from the classroom, you can access a transcript. The transcript is extremely faithful. It's not machine generated, it's written by humans, and it's also often synchronous. You can actually see it alongside at the same time as the actual presentation. So before the online lesson, this is some material. It's from my own book, but here you can see that students can look up words before they listen. They can listen and process the content, and they can get ready for the discussion all before the discussion takes place. So when the online class takes place, students have already been prepared. This is known as flipping. I think you know this, where you flip the class so that the students do the work before they come to class. So listening is often done asynchronously, as is reading. This is our final practical idea for this webinar. Before the class, I give half the group the text on the left, which is top 5 reasons why online learning is better than face-to-face, and I give the other class this article, which is why traditional classroom learning is better than online courses. So the students read different texts. They also have this worksheet where they can complete the missing information, summarize their text. So by the time they come to the classroom, they've already read it. And what's so interesting when you flip like this, if you ask students, how many times did you listen to the talk? The first time I did this, one student said once, the next student said twice, the next student said 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times. One student listened 6 times before they came to the class. So you can leverage this and really help your students develop their listening. And similarly, we read at different speeds. And so this is a great way to do much of the skills work using asynchronous teaching, and then in the classroom, the synchronous class, deal with vocabulary. Okay, so those were just a few practical ideas. I'm sure we can add many, many more, but I hope they've been helpful and interesting and useful for you so that you might adapt some, or they inspire you to think about others. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes now just to sum up. If you have any questions, I know that the moderator is going to gather up a few, and so we'll use our remaining time to answer those. But I just wanted to remind you that the aim of this session is really to explore how the principles of virtual blending can actually help teachers who are at the moment delivering online courses. And really, I'd like to just sum up by saying that blended learning has had a long history, that the move to teaching online has been so quick, and that many lessons which are being delivered today in an online environment are amazing because the teachers are still learning about many of those tools like Zoom and MS Teams, but it's not the same as lessons which are delivered with pedagogy, with principles and so on. It's very, very quick. So I'm just suggesting, my main argument is to just step back, take a look at what we can learn from virtual blending, and then apply that into the online environment. So context is critical here. Everybody's teaching context might be different depending on if you use publisher materials, if you're creating your own courses and flipping them, if you're doing that as a freelance teacher or using a platform from your institution. But a virtual blend should be built on similar principles to blended learning. In other words, that what you're doing is appropriate for that mode, that your two modes are beautifully integrated, and that you yourself are positive about this. And I think more and more people are becoming more and more positive about what we can do online, but that you do have appropriate training, and the benefits are many. And I think it's wonderful that we can differentiate between our learners and give them this kind of choice, because I think this is really how teaching is developing now. So thank you very, very much for coming along. Don't forget to visit my blog. I'll blog this fairly shortly. And just to say, I'm going to finish off now and invite any questions.
Thank you, Pete Sharma. And it's really rich and rewarding experience to sit through your session. Rich in the sense that it is loaded with information. We have gained much of useful knowledge, so it is rewarding. Now it is time to answer to the queries of the audience. The first question is from Ms. Nivedita Caroline Lobo. She asked, does blended learning require all students to be connected at the same time? If so, what about students who are unable to get network coverage, and what about slow learners?
Thank you. Sorry, what was the last part? And what about
slow learners?
Oh, slow learners. Yeah. Okay. So I would say that the answer to the first part of that question, does blended learning require all students to be connected at the same time? That the answer for blended learning is no. It doesn't. There are many blended learning courses where you don't even need to be connected. For example, you could do all the work offline. If you take the situation of a virtual blend, If you have the synchronous classroom, then I think the answer is yes. For the synchronous classroom, obviously it is better if all the students can come together and work together at the same time. And in terms of slow learning, I think that slower learners, I think this is the most wonderful thing about blended learning, this differentiation and flipped learning, is that you can go at your own speed. So I think that's wonderful. When we did the summer course, we had all the materials on the Moodle, and if somebody would say, how long does it take? And we would say, well, an hour is a good time for you to do it. But if you do it very, very quickly, if you're fast, you could maybe do it in a slightly shorter time. But if you want to spend longer, then that's absolutely fine. So I think that slow learners can benefit tremendously from blended and flipped courses. Okay, I hope that helps.
Yes, yes. Now to the next question. Students in face-to-face scenario are monitored and motivated. But in online learning situation, how do we motivate them?
That is an absolutely fantastic question. It's one that everybody asks, and I would suggest that there's one very, very simple answer, and that's the teacher. I know when we look back on our summer, we gave all the students fantastic material on Moodle, but material is of course dead in some senses. It's just material. What makes any course alive and living, and what motivates many of our students, is the relationship that they have for the teacher. So research and studies on blended learning, even though I gave 4 factors, one of the real critical things is the teacher. The teacher makes the difference. And when we came to the end of summer and we looked at all our students, they loved the classes. They said again and again, I loved the course. I couldn't wait for my classes because it was the teacher that motivated me. So I would say that the teacher is a critical factor in this. There are many other things that motivate people. And I think we should be very honest and look at ourselves and see what motivates us. But that will be my short answer to that question.
And now to the final question. In India, we have larger classroom, and it happens to a teacher to deal with 4 or 5 classes in a semester. How can the teacher manage it effectively?
I wonder if you would be kind enough just to repeat the first part of that question for me.
In India, he's talking about the Indian scenario. We have larger classroom, and it happens to a teacher to deal with 4 or 5 classes in a semester.
Right. So the question, do I understand it correctly? That the question is, how do you manage teaching the larger classes?
Yeah, larger classes, and the teacher is also overloaded with many number of classes.
Right. Okay. If we take the larger classes, I would say in Zoom, use the breakout rooms. Breakout rooms are a wonderful feature of online teaching, and you need to get familiar with them as fast as you can. You can set do it automatically. You just click and the software will divide the class. I don't know, a class of 50, if you say you wanted your students to be in 10 small groups of 5, you just click a button and the students are in that room, and then the teacher can monitor and go round. So break up the larger group for pedagogical reasons. You often need to do less work online. Classroom doesn't translate automatically into online in terms of hours, so you do less work. So if you had an hour, you would say, split the group once and really get them working hard and long in for 15 minutes and then come back and feedback. And if you're overloaded, one of the best things about online is repetition. The materials, when you've built them, they can be for very different classes and used again and again. So I think it's really useful to recycle as much as possible. It's very easy to find you have too much work and not enough time, and you become very tired very quickly if you're only doing online. So find tips and tricks to make your life easier, and recycling material, changing it in its digital format again and again can really help. So I think that would just be one tip.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mr. P. Sharma. Now, just to sum up what you have said in the whole presentation, you have gone an extra mile in presenting the nuances of virtual blended learning and explored how the principle of virtual learning can help teachers move online. Blended learning, the concept itself, is grounded in the notion of flexibility, and it is the need of the hour to be acquainted with it in the new normal situation. Mr. P. Sharma has explicitly explained the success factor of virtual blended learning, namely appropriacy, complementary interaction, attitude, and training. He has also presented 3 scenarios of virtual blended learning, naming Courseware, flipped EAP course, and do it yourself, which covered, he also presented a practical framework which covered everything from grammar, vocabulary to assessment. We will do a virtual blending of your theoretical inputs like flexibility, differentiation, personalization, choice, encouraging our autonomy in our practical framework. And it is going to be quite useful in a challenging scenario like what you're facing in a normal situation. Thanks a lot for this informative and erudite session. May I now request Dr. Anita Devi to propose the formal vote of thanks. Over to Dr. Anita Devi.
Thank you, Dr. Aragamalar. Thank you, Aragamalar. I hope my connectivity is fine. Thank you, Aragamalar. And thank you, Pete, for the wonderful session. I can see the number of, the comments on the chat, trying to really overflow with a lot of appreciation on your presentation. Okay, over to the formal vote of thanks. On behalf of the ELTAI Vellore chapter, I would like to thank the resource person, Pete Sharma, from United Kingdom, for having delivered an interesting and informative session on virtual blended learning, making it real. And he has really made it real for us, telling us all the ways that we can make it real. And thanks to all the active participants for answering the poll questions, your questions that you have asked for the session, and how you have answered the questions that Pete has asked us during the session, and also providing great feedback on the chat about the whole event, the title of the session, the speaker, and the knowledge that has been shared. Thank you for all that. I would also like to thank the moderator, Aragamalar, for having accepted to moderate along with me in this webinar. I also would like to thank the organizing committee members and the office bearers of English Language Teachers Association of India for supporting and guiding us in organizing this webinar. Thank you. We have the next announcement for the next webinar, the next week on Sunday. It is on communicative competence in English, and it will be delivered by Dr. Praveen Joshi, Director. Just a second. Director, Prerna College of Commerce, Nagpur, and This session is mainly for the students, and we do have two student speakers, Mr. Nivruti Sudhir and Ms. Sakshi Bagne. So we would have a wonderful session. I request all the participants to share this webinar to their students so that they can make use of it. Now we have a few announcements regarding the certificate of this webinar. All the participants who have attended the entire session will get the certificates by email within 5 days. There is no feedback form for this session. There's one important tip that I would like to tell all the participants and also share it to other interested participants. That whenever you register for the ELTAI webinars on Webinar Jam, kindly click on auto subscribe to future webinars from this host. Thank you for listening. Have a good evening. And good day to you, Mr. Pete. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and goodbye to everybody. Thank you. That was a great experience. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye.